Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 2. In this video, I cover Season 2 as a whole of The Rings of Power. So I have to start with the spoiler warning for Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 2. If you have not seen the entirety of Season 2, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, I wasn't really anticipating Season 2 all that much. I liked Season 1. I thought it was okay, but I wasn't like in love with it. I didn't think it was an amazing show. I wasn't really that looking forward to Season 2. To be honest, my attitude when it came out, I was like, yeah, I might as well watch this. But, I ended up liking it better than Season 1. I think it's definitely an improvement on Season 1. It gets more into the Rings of Power, and most of the storylines are more interesting. And it has, especially the character exploration of Sauron was actually absolutely amazing. And I think this is building off of the reveal at the end of Season 1 that Halbrand was Sauron, which I loved. I know not everyone liked it, but I thought that was great. But I think Season 2 definitely started out very strong. Now, it did dip in middle, especially when it introduced some other storylines that were not so great. And it did have a strong ending, but it wasn't quite as strong as the ending of Season 1, in my opinion. But still, overall, I would say this is definitely a clear improvement over Season 1. Now, in between seasons, I looked up more of the lore, the Tolkien lore from Lord of the Rings that takes place during this time, during the time the show is set. And, I knew that the show was not being faithful to the overall lore, and I already didn't care. I already announced, that doesn't bother me at all. But I found it interesting that there are definitely certain things that the show does pull directly from the lore, such as Sauron being taking the form of an elf named Anatar and calling himself the Lord of Giths. That was pulled directly from the lore, and there's several other things as well. But overall, they do. Sometimes they don't always follow the lore. Sometimes they do stuff that's contrary to it or introduce new stuff to it. But for me, the biggest thing that I noticed is that they are taking events that happen over a span of 1,000 years in the lore and condensing it into sort of one thing, and they're taking stuff that happened maybe 1,000 years later, 1,000 years earlier, and just sticking it in here. And I'm perfectly fine with that. I actually have no issue with this. I've seen some squabbles that some Lord of the Rings purists have with this show, and I don't care. I just think they're silly. They don't bother me. But I do find that interesting. And it's hard to predict where the show will go based on the lore, because you have no idea what they're actually going to follow or in what order or how quickly. There's certain things, if you've seen the prologue to the Lord of the Rings movie, you know where the show is going. It's basically following that prologue, so you know what they're building to. So there's certain things they're going to, Sauron's going to create the One Ring, because otherwise there's no fucking Lord of the Rings trilogy. So that's going to happen. There's certain things that's going to happen. But other things, you're not so sure if it's going to happen in the show or in what order. So that is just something I found interesting. Anyway, jumping straight into the show, more specifics about the show. So I broke the Season 2 down into 7 storylines. Now, these storylines are subjective because some of them sort of intermingle or sort of there's some crossover between them. But this is what I decided to do just for this review, is to break down the season in 7 storylines, and I'm going to go in order from my least favorite storyline to my favorite storyline. So the storylines I like the least is what I'll start with, and later, but at the end, I'll get to my favorite storyline. So let's start with my least favorite storyline of the season, and that is very easily Numenor. So I watched, if you ever watch the pitch meetings from Running George on YouTube, he does these videos, pitch meetings, does it for all these movies. Very funny skit. Absolutely love them. Recommend them if you haven't seen it. He did one for The Rings of Power for season 1, and he had the screenwriter go up to the producer guy and was pronouncing the names like Numenor, Sauron, Galadriel. And then the producer guy's like, please stop. I'm sorry, but I keep thinking of that over and over again every time I hear these names, especially Numenor. And I kept thinking of that over and over again while I was watching season 2. But anyway, neither here nor there. Numenor is definitely the most boring storyline in my opinion. I didn't like it in season 1. It introduced all these characters like Pharazôn, his son, and the random old dude that supported Pharazôn, and then there was Isildur's best friend and Isildur's sister, and these were all like caricatures, and this is one of my biggest complaints about season 1, and it did not get any better in season 2. In fact, it got worse because it was reminiscent of Game of Thrones season 8, and just in the sense of, like, they didn't totally ruin everyone's character, but because their characters were never good in the first place. But it's reminiscent in the sense that it's just events happening, and there's really no sort of meaning or fleshed out characters behind it. It's just a series of boom, 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 boom events occurring, and they happen kind of fast. It's very like all of a sudden the eagle shows up and Pharazôn's like, I'm the leader now, and everyone bows to them, and then all of a sudden he goes after all the other faithful, and then all of a sudden like the serpent saves the queen or some shit, and it's very like, I'm so detached. I'm beyond caring about the storyline. Now I do like Elendil as a character, but it's just all these other characters, like, as I said, like Pharazôn's son, this stupid dweeb dickhead. Like, I couldn't give a shit about him. And he killed Isildur's friend. Oh no, I totally care about that. Like, I really don't care. And it's just a series of events happening that I'm kind of feeling like part of me is like, I'm glad they're going fast-paced with this, because just get the storyline over with. Just get to the point where Elendil and Isildur go to Middle-earth and set up colonies, because that's, again, we've seen the prologue of the freaking movie. We know what that's building up to, and so they're kind of just fucking around. And there's a certain other event that I don't want to spoil for those not familiar with the lore that they're building up to as well. So just fucking get there and stop wasting my time with this bullshit I don't care about. Like, the ending of the season, it shows Elendil's like, oh, we need to escape to Middle-earth. I'm like, yes, please, finally, go to Middle-earth. But then Isildur is going back to Numenor. I'm like, no, what the fuck are you doing? You're supposed to... so now I'm afraid that we're going to get more of this boring-ass Numenor bullshit. Just get to the fucking point. As I said, get rid of this storyline. Anyway, so we'll get to my second least favorite storyline of the season. And speaking of Isildur, it is Isildur and Theo. And I guess Eredin, what's his name? Arodon or whatever his name is. Eredir. The stupid Arondir. That's his name, Arondir. But anyway, the elf guy. So, yeah, so I didn't care for this storyline that much either. I mean, we knew Isildur was going to live because we've seen the Lord of the Rings. And it's kind of, silly that a horse comes in and saves him from a spider. I mean, whatever, sure, that might as well happen. And then I did kind of like him, hooking up with that one girl who turns out to have the mark of Sauron, and it creates sort of mystery. But part of me felt like it was a little bit of filler. I guess that remains to be seen. If they actually do something with her character, then maybe that's important backstory that we'll need. I feel like she's kind of a replacement for Bronwyn, who they killed in between seasons because the actress quit. It's funny because they didn't recast her, because with Adar, that actor quit, and they recast him, so he was obviously important enough that, oh, we can't just write this character off the show, so let's recast. But with Bronwyn, it was obvious, like, yeah, we don't need that character anyway, and they just killed her off. So it makes me think that whole thing was kind of a waste of time. I don't really care about Theo, for that matter, the whole thing with him, being all pissed off with Arondir, and, oh, I don't care about you, you're not my dad. I don't give a shit. And the stuff with the Ents, I kind of feel like that's like, ooh, look, I know the Ents. They're from the movie. They're from the other movie. Yeah, I mean, whatever. Ents, they're there, I guess. I mean, but, they might play a part in season 3 because at the end of the season, that twerp guy was like, take it down, get his lumber, cut down all the trees, and they looked at each other like, oh, fucking Ents aren't going to like this. So they're setting it up. But really, it seemed weird to me. Like, I didn't realize that place they were hanging out with was a colony of Numenor. Like, they didn't establish that. Like, that was a surprise to me when that, Farazan's son dickhead showed up and he was like, oh, I'm taking control here. And I'm like, just cut to the point where you kill this fucker and so we can move past this. Please. Just please. Now, maybe he's going to be one of the ring wraiths, one of the people who gets the rings. I hope not, because that means he would be in the show longer. Just kill him off, get rid of him. Well, I know Farazan is definitely going to be one of the people who gets the rings, because we know that 9 men get the rings, and those are the 9 men who will become the ring wraiths. But we don't know the Nazgul, but we don't know who they are. In lore, we don't even know that. It was never stated. Although I think it's pretty specific it wasn't Farazan. But I think in the show it is going to be Farazan. And so that's going to be interesting. How that plays out. Hopefully next season, since we know Sauron has the 9 rings, we will see him giving to the 9 men, and I think they will mostly be characters we know. So maybe it will be this twerp, but I'd rather they kill him off personally. Anyway, so I'll get to my third least favorite storyline of the season. That's Gandalf and Nori, and yes, it's Gandalf. Like, it's kind of annoyed me how they waited all season to the end to confirm it's Gandalf. Like, I was watching these other videos, I was like, oh, everyone thinks it's Gandalf, but my theory is not Gandalf. I'm like, it's so obvious that it's Gandalf. So referencing the pitch meeting again, when the screenwriter was pitching it, it's like, oh, this guy with magical powers who's tall and has a beard, and is like really tall in the beard, so it's Gandalf. He's like, no. And then the producer guy is like, oh, being obviously Gandalf is tight. Everybody knows it's Gandalf. Stop fucking around and like, oh, I don't know. And they drop these hints, like she mentioned, and I think early in the season, Nori mentioned a Gand. Oh, or was it last season? Oh, he needs to find a Gand. And then he quoted Gandalf from the movie saying, oh, when in doubt, follow your nose. I mean, it's obviously fucking Gandalf. And so by the time we got to the end of the season, when he said, oh, did Gandalf, that's what they will call me. I know some people might be like, oh yeah, obviously it's the kind of the prequel-itis moment, or the fan service, oh look, it's Gandalf. But that wasn't my reaction. My reaction was, finally! Thank God, they should have fucking did this earlier. They should have done it earlier in the season. It should have happened in episode 1 of season 2 of him saying this, instead of being like, oh, I don't know who this is. I'm not sure. We all know we knew it was Gandalf from season 1. Like, anyone who didn't know earlier in the season definitely knew for sure by the end of the season. So why fucking pretending like we don't already know? And the funny thing is, and I did catch this line, I thought was pretty nifty. I think it was Poppy, is that her name? Nori's friend? Anyway, she, was it her or Nori? One of them said, oh, don't be a stranger. Get it? Get it? Because that's what they were calling him before, the stranger. And then she said, don't be a stranger. Because he's Gandalf now, he's not the stranger anymore. Anyway, so this storyline was okay. Like, I think I liked it better in the first half when Nori and Poppy were hanging out with him. It was these two are definitely doing. It's so obviously they're doing a Frodo and Sam thing here with those characters. I mean, so obvious. They even had, at the end of the season, they had Poppy, or whatever her name is, give like this huge speech while they had a montage under music. And I'm like, they're doing the exact fucking same thing that they did at the end of the Two Towers with Sam and his big speech. And also, speaking of the season finale, it had multiple endings too, because I thought that was the end, but then there was another end, and then there was another end, so it was being like Return of the King too. They were just trying so hard to be like the Lord of the Rings movies. And then the other thing was that they were emulating other stuff. Was the stuff with Tom Bombadil and Gandalf was pretty much like Yoda and Luke Skywalker from Empire Strikes Back, and they were hanging out in a hut, and Tom Bombadil was telling him what he needs to know in order to train and become a wizard. And then at the end, Tom Bombadil gave him the choice of, you can either help your friends, but if you do that, you're going to throw away all your training, and everything that we fought for would be meaningless. It's like, this is right out of Empire Strikes Back. But to be fair to them, they actually reversed it, whereas Yoda was saying, he was sincere, and if you go try to save your friends, you'll fuck up everything. But this Tom Bombadil is actually a test. He actually did want him to choose his friends over the power, which I actually liked. I liked they subverted that. It doesn't make it any less of them copying that, though. But they just decided, we'll copy it, but we'll flip it. We'll subvert it, which I did like, to be clear. But the whole thing with Tom Bombadil, like, I have read the books, but only after I saw the movies. So I'm a movie first kind of guy, and so I wasn't a huge Bombadil fan. I wasn't like, when I saw the movie, being like all pissed off and upset that they didn't include him. I actually totally agree with them cutting him from the movies, because he was unnecessary for the plot in the movies. I had enough material as it was, so I think they made the totally right decision by cutting him. But that being said, it was cool to see him in the show. I think he was fine, but I think towards I liked the first couple scenes with him, but then after a while it got kind of boring, and he's just like, old Tom, and I don't know. And by the end of the season, I was like, I kind of had enough of him. Can we move past this now? But I don't know if he will be in season 3. I think he was kind of the Yoda character who's just in the second part. I don't know, but I thought that was fine. That was fine. But and the Stoors, we meet the Stoors. They were fine too, I guess. I don't know. I just didn't, once with that storyline got going, I just didn't really care all that much for it, and I kept wanting them to go back to the other Wolf storylines. So, moving on to the other storylines. Well, next I'll get to the one that I thought was fine. Was I mean, it was good. It was fine. It was whatever. It was good. But it was Durin and the Dwarfs. It was kind of the kind of stereotypical story you would expect with the Rings of Power, where it's the old gold fever type story where Durin's father becomes mad and corrupt and greedy because the ring is corrupting him. But, even though that's cliche, I think the way they handled it, I mean, it's kind of inevitable, too, when you're doing a story about the Rings of Power. But I think that it was fine. Like, it was fine the way that they handled it. It was kind of interesting. The back and forth with Durin and, Disa kind of figuring out that they're about to unleash the monster, which was teased at the end, the Balrog that was teased at the end of season 1, and how they were being manipulated by Sauron to giving the Mithril to Celebrimbor so he could make more rings. And And it was a kind of an interesting quandary they had by the end of the season when Durin the Younger had to choose whether or not he would save his father, save the dwarves, or help the elves. So obviously he had to save his father first, and then he sent the other dwarves to help the elves because he was in mourning for the loss of his father, because the whole thing with the Balrog, which I thought was fine. It was definitely beautifully shot. Whatever you say about this show, it is beautifully shot. And the special effects are great. They're obviously pumping in a lot of money, and you can tell. So that shot of Durin the Elder sacrificing himself was an absolutely beautiful shot in the Balrog. So that was all well and good. As I said, the storyline was fine. But I didn't like where they left it for season 3, because they're like, oh, these other dwarves are upset because they're expecting the rings, and then your brother's gonna fight you for the crown. I'm like, really? We never met his brother. Do we need this fucking storyline about this fighting over the crown for his, I'd rather skip that. But I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe I will end up liking the storyline, but I doubt it. Anyway, so next storyline, which is kind of not really its own storyline, but I'm still counting it as such, is Adar. Because he was sort of more in other people's storylines, but he was kind of his own sort of thing. Again, as I mentioned, he was recast, and so I thought he was important enough to keep around. But I do wonder, I'll get more into the prologue when I get into Sauron, but I do wonder why he was even necessary in the first place. They did clarify, because in season 1 he was like hated Sauron, so they clarified this, and he did say he killed Sauron, so they clarified this, which is good. He says, oh, I love the orcs, they're my children. And then he's so obsessed with finding Sauron that he sends them all these the orcs to their deaths instead of working with the elves. He sends all the orcs to their deaths, and is being unreasonable. I don't give a shit that you're all dying. Do it. And it was obvious. It was fucking obvious they were going to turn on him. Although I did think at first that it would have been Galadriel who tricked them into turning on him, but it ended up being Sauron instead, which makes more sense because he's the one that gets the orcs. But I really don't see. I don't know. I don't really see why we needed this character at all. It's kind of just to drag out the story. I guess you need someone attacking the elves. I mean, but Sauron could have prearranged for the orcs to attack him if Sauron was in charge of the orcs in the first place. I don't know. And then Adar did that bullshit by creating Mordor in season 1. So I guess he needs to be there for that, I suppose. I don't know. I still feel like this character is kind of unnecessary because he ends up dying and all the orcs go to Sauron anyway, so why was he even there? I don't know. I did kind of like the thing when he got the ring and turned back into an elf, and he didn't like it because his whole identity was being Uruk, and he was like, so yeah. I mean, that was kind of interesting, whatever, but it was dumb how if he had just made that piece, the alliance with the elves in the first place, then none of that war would have happened, and Galadriel was 100% that Sauron wanted him to attack Eregion, and but again, that's for the plot. They need it. It's part of the lore that Eregion was destroyed, so they need that to happen. But whatever. Anyway, so we get to and I sound kind of negative on that storyline, but it's actually one of my favorite ones because I did like what they did with him overall. Anyway, so then we'll get to my second favorite storyline, which is Elrond and Galadriel. Sorry. Please stop. No, and yeah, I like this. I think from the beginning, I like how they didn't trust Galadriel, and there was a rift between the two of them, and Elrond sort of stole the rings and ran off and tried to have them destroyed, but he trusted that one dude who was like, no, actually, I think we should keep these, and betrayed him, and that was cool. It set the whole thing about, and you get the sense that Elrond's correct, especially what we know with the One Ring later on, that he's correct in not trusting the rings when he heard that Sauron helped create them. And, so they're sort of back and forth and how they go on the mission to try to save Celebrimbor, but they don't get there in time, and they get distracted. Again, Adar kind of fucked things up, and it's so... the whole battle, it was okay. I didn't think it was amazing. The penultimate episode, it was obvious to me they were trying to be like Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones would have a big battle episode that was devoted just to the battle that would be the penultimate episode of the season. And it seems like they were like, let's do the Game of Thrones thing. And, I mean, it was well shot again. I never fault the show on the production value, the music, and the special effects, and the cinematography. All that is great, but I just wasn't as invested in the battle because I don't know. It's just they shouldn't really be fighting in the first place, because they both want Sauron dead. So it seems kind of iffy. I don't know. That's why it would have made more sense to me if Adar didn't exist and it was Sauron's forces to begin with. But anywho, and that they were just attacking Eregion because Sauron wanted them to. But anyway, I thought that was fine. And then I do like Elrond's involvement and how they were trusting the dwarves to show up, but because they had their own issues, they didn't show up until much too late. Well, not too late, because they did kind of save some of the elves. They managed to get some of them out of there and fight back the orcs, but still, it's... Yeah, it was fine. But then when Elrond and the other elves land to this new place, they say, it's a sanctuary. I was so expecting them to say, and we will call it Rivendell, because that's what it is. That's what they're getting at. But I'm actually kind of, even though I thought it would have been cheesy for them to say that, I'm kind of saying with the Gandalf thing, it's just fucking say it's Rivendell, because we know what it is. Yeah, all that was good. Especially Galadriel. I really liked her storyline this season. She had her big one-on-one battle with Sauron, which was really intense. I love that. I think that really worked. And how she almost died and was saved. Obviously, we know she's not going to die. But still, how she was saved by the elven medicine and everything, is good. I liked it. So we'll get to my favorite storyline this season. Bar none, the one I liked was Sauron and Celebrimbor. This is another thing that was taken from lore, that Celebrimbor was the one who created the rings, and Sauron tricked him to, as I talked about, he pretended to be this elf lord of gifts, and I think the way they played it out was actually really, really good. The way that he tricked him. The one thing I will say about Sauron, so I'll start with the beginning, because we had that prologue, which was amazing at the start of the episode 1, at the start of the season, where we saw the backstory of Sauron and how Adar killed him. That was really cool. I was thrown off by the fact that both Adar and Sauron were recast, but then I realized that they recast Sauron on purpose. That was in character because he had a different form before, and then he got a new form later on, which is why Adar didn't detect him. So, but Adar being recast as well kind of threw me. That was actually just the recasting because they couldn't get the actor back. But anyway, that was a really cool prologue. It was really interesting how they built up what Sauron, how he ended up where he did, and how he kind of meant to. I feel like they were implying he wanted to find Galadriel, wanted to be there, wanted to hook up. I don't know if that's the case. But anyway, it was he definitely took advantage of it either way, and he's the one that got the monster to destroy the ship in the first place. So that was really good. That was a great way to start the season. The one thing I will say is the whole thing with Sauron going to Adar in Mordor that was totally pointless. Like, you could have cut that out entirely. Like, why did he do that again? Because Adar figured out that was Sauron, like, shortly thereafter, and he was like, oh, I know where Sauron is, I will find him for you, and he, like, suffered all this torture until Adar finally let him go. But why didn't he just go straight to fucking Sauron? Like, why did he even bother to Celebrimbor? Why did he even bother going to Mordor first? I think it's because at the end of season 1 they showed Sauron walking into Mordor. It's like, oh shit, we showed him walking to Mordor, so now we have to do something, so let's just have him show up there real quick and get arrested and tortured and then leave. Like, why? He didn't need to do that. But anyway, regardless of that, I really loved this storyline this season, especially when it got into the stuff with Celebrimbor and how the nuances of he was playing tricks in his mind, and you see him slowly manipulating him, you see him slowly manipulating the people around him, the people that worked for him, and how it got to the point where they believed Celebrimbor went mad and they gave Sauron all the power. Like, it was fucking brilliant. And at the end we get the final episode where he's like torturing Celebrimbor and just throwing knives at him. And again, that's not exactly word perfect for the lore, but it goes along with the spirit of the lore. Yeah, that was amazing. That was like really intense stuff. And as I said, the stuff where he, like, this fight scenes with him and Galadriel was great. Yeah, and I love how Celebrimbor, the scenes with him and Galadriel were really touching, where she apologized for bringing Sauron there, and he was like, no, we were both deceived. And he has some good lines too about, this is why they call you the deceiver, because you deceive even yourself. Like, the interactions between the two of them, like, all season long, were just so good. I'm kind of disappointed that we won't get Celebrimbor in future seasons, but I kind of knew that he was always there just to create the rings and die, because that's what happens in lore. But yeah, no, I didn't expect them to use him as much as they did. The one thing I will say is that I kind of thought when King Elf guy sent the messenger to warn Celebrimbor, I foolishly thought, oh yeah, he's going to be warned right away. But no, they kill the messenger, so he never gets the message. I was like, oh, so they're going to send Elrond and Galadriel, and they'll tell him and warn him about Sauron. But no, that didn't happen either, because they get stopped by Adar and his forces. But I was foolish to think that he would have found out, because obviously he couldn't, because he needs to create the rings. We know this. Otherwise, there's no fucking movie trilogy or books. So yeah, obviously he needs to make the rings. So I should have realized that he's just never going to get the message. But anyway, regardless, I think Sauron in particular, like, the actor who plays him, is so good. Like, I think this is a much better performance than in season 1 as Halbrand. So, and just the way that they fucked. And it's interesting to note that the actor said that he didn't realize when he was cast or when he started filming the earlier episodes that he was Sauron, which I think is a mistake. It might have been better if they told him, so then he could drop hints in his acting. But you see that because when he was cast, he didn't know he'd be playing the main villain of the show, but he really handles it well. So that really worked. So yeah, I overall like the season. Maybe it's not, I don't think, again, I'm not like so excited, and I'm still, even though I fucking hate the way season 2 of House of the Dragon ended and it just pacing was terrible, I'm still much more excited about that show than I am about this one. Even though it moved way too slowly, I still overall like the characters and like the story and invested in it a lot more than I am with this one. But so I'm not crazy about this show yet. I'm not going to be like clamoring, oh my god, I can't wait for the next season. But it's good. So I will definitely watch it when it comes out in a couple years. So my rating for The Rings of Power, season 2 as a whole, is going to be an 8. Extremely good. Now, looking back on season 1, I noticed I gave that an 8. I am going to retroactively downgrade that to a 7 because I think this season is a point better than the previous season, but I don't think this is a 9. This is not at a 9. And then when I look back at season 1, I think 8 is too high for it. Like, it had a great ending, and I think I was just enthralled by that, but most of the season was kind of boring. Where most of the season here, except for the Numenor storyline and the Theo stuff, was actually really good. That Numenor and Isildur stuff is when those were like, can we not do those? Like, even the Gandalf and Nori stuff had its high points. Like, even that was still good. So, it was mainly just those two things, whereas season 1 had a lot wrong with it, especially in that middle of the season. So I think 8 is too high for season 1, so reduce that to a 7. And I think 9 is too high for this. I don't think it's quite there to be a 9, so this is an 8. Extremely good. So that is it for my review of Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 2. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. Consider subscribing, and if you really enjoy my content, consider supporting me on Patreon, as I cover a lot of Star Trek stuff, especially if you're a fan of Star Trek. Got a lot of bonus material over on Patreon for Star Trek, and I'm covering Star Trek episode by episode, currently in Next Generation Season 7, about to start, or ending up Season 6, and DS9 Season 1. So, yes, be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover many shows, mostly Star Trek Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Lower Decks will be starting soon. And, check out my channel as I cover all that and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.